Hi, bye.
Karpinski, it's the division.
Alright, let me just talk to this guy.
Glad to see you.
Games today have evolved so much that in many cases they don't just look realistic, they look real. Computer hardware's capabilities have increased exponentially over the past couple of decades and allows you to have gaming experiences that we couldn't even dream of in the past. But not everyone has a super high-end computer, and not everyone wants to spend hundreds or sometimes even thousands of euros to build one and be able to experience the best games out there. Well, I have good news. Some of the best games ever released have already been released in the past, and chances are that your computer, no matter how old or slow, can run them. Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Bearded Gamer, and today we'll be looking at 11 plus 1 great games that you can play on your shitty ass pewter. Today's list will comprise of older games that were released in the 90s or early 2000s that every gamer should play or at least have heard of. So that means that I will not include more recent games such as Minecraft or Undertale. I will also try to avoid games from franchises that are still super popular today with newer releases such as Diablo, for example, since even younger gamers already know about those. We're looking at gaming gems the time or the newer generation of gamers has forgotten. Also, no multiplayer games will be included on this list, since with the exception of a very few, multiplayer games from those years have probably been abandoned completely. So, let's get started. System Shock 2 was a game that was ahead of its time. Even today, it's considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, and it actually got a number of Game of the Year awards when it was released. It's set in the year 2114, and you play as a soldier on board a spaceship, and your goal is to stop a virus that has run rampant through the ship, affecting people and the ship itself. This story continues from the first System Shock, so if you want to actually check it out and play through the whole story, have a look at System Shock 1 first. There's also an enhanced edition with updated graphics and controls that you can check out. System Shock 2 looks how you would expect a game from 1999 to look, but it had many unique gameplay mechanics for the time, such as the hacking feature where you could bypass electronic devices security and change their original function to favor your needs. It definitely has a Half-Life 1 feeling to it, but it also adds some RPG elements as well. You have an inventory and you have skills that you can evolve. Due to the status the game has acquired over the years, there's been loads of community mods released that can make the game look and feel more modern, such as high-res texture packs or better UIs. Just head to ModDB and check them out. To run the game, you'll need the following specs.
Please report any unauthorized database interactions to your direct superior.
You guys are lucky.
Deus Ex Invisible War was released in 2004 and is the second game in the series. Just like with System Shock 2, I've skipped the first one in the series mainly because I find it hard to believe that a computer so old and so slow that it can't run the first Deus Ex or the first System Shock would still actually work. I just consider them playable on any still functioning PC, so there's no reason to point out required specs and all that. If you press the power button on your PC and it turns on, you can play these two games and probably most of the games on this list. Invisible War also has ridiculously low system requirements, but it looks way better than the first one. 2004 was around the time that game developers were really moving forward fast with what you could do in video games. Besides graphics getting better and better, so did gameplay mechanics. You could pick up and throw items, NPCs have decent facial animations, and in Invisible War they put all these features to good use to create a beautiful and alive game world. Although there is a main story that you need to play through in order to complete the game, there are also a number of subplots that can go in different directions depending on the choices you make. Therefore, different players will have a different experience during their playthrough. Invisible War continues from the events of the first game, so if you want to get the full story, play the first one first. The required specs to play the game are as follows.
bowled me over as my gun went off. I woke up in a hospital bed with severe burns.
Clive Barker's Undying is an FPS horror game where you play as a paranormal investigator in 1923 who receives a letter from a friend called Jeremiah Covenant asking him to investigate his family home where a number of paranormal events are happening that caused his entire family to die one after another and leaving Jeremiah as the only survivor. The game came out back in the day when game magazines came with CDs full of demos, and if I remember correctly, my first look of this game was from one of these CDs that came along with the PC Gamer magazine. I still remember that scene with the mirror and get goosebumps. The game looks pretty decent considering it's 18 years old and does a really good job of giving the player a scare or two. It's easy to ignore the aged graphics when the atmosphere is so dark and eerie that you get sucked into it. Cutscenes, jump scares, weird hellish areas, Lovecraftian creatures, and pretty solid gameplay make this game a must play. In fact, the only negative thing I can think of about the game is that throughout your playthrough, the enemies seem to just appear randomly. You're walking around, boom, random weird enemy, kill it, move on, repeat. Not that other more modern games don't do this, but in modern games, you'll usually see an enemy jumping out from a hiding spot or feeding on a corpse, and you just run into them. In this case, the enemies just appear. Nevertheless, if your PC can't handle anything more recent or graphically demanding and you want to play a decent cult horror game, then definitely check out Undying. To run the game, you'll need the following. The last FPS on this list is a game that is more well known for the multiplayer editions of the series, Unreal Tournament. But it was the first Unreal that kicked everything off in 1998, followed 5 years later by The Awakening. Not too much of a complicated plot really. You play as a former Marine who patrols quiet areas of space for any noteworthy activity. At some point you get called back and are assigned a mission. Retrieve pieces of an artifact that when put together form a really powerful weapon. The game has a lot of shooting, some puzzles, and then some more shooting. Despite its simplicity, Unreal 2 feels like a better game than what it sounded like when I was describing it a few seconds ago. I don't know if it's the nostalgia kicking in or if the gameplay for its time was the best part of it, but here we are.
Here they are. No, wait.
Alrighty, so to run the game you'll need the following.
Then I'll turn them over.
Fine, you hold on to them. Let's head back to my ship.
Stay here. It's the safest place for you. Just lock the door when we leave.
Moving on to another genre, let's check out a couple of RPGs. If you're a true gaming connoisseur and you don't just play whatever game was advertised the most recently and you want to give some old school games a chance and see what people played 20 years ago, Baldur's Gate is the way to go. In this list, I'm including Baldur's Gate 2 because it's even better than the first and there are no significant differences in the UI or graphics, so you'll still get in touch with the RPG worlds of the past. You can understand that being released in 2000, its looks can be hard to get used to, but if you like RPGs and decide to give it a chance, you might get really into it. There's also an enhanced edition out on Steam if you want to have a look. To run it, you'll need the following.
My head would be silent.
Back in 2002 when Divinity came out, its graphics already looked dated for the time. Better graphics were available out there and yet they still stayed with the older look. I honestly believe this was done on purpose because they wanted to stick with the classic style of the RPG genre. I remember that I first gave it a shot when I completed Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction and I was so hooked that I wanted to find another similar game. Along came Divinity. Lucky me, it wasn't just some sort of cheap clone, but instead was a great game in its own right. The dialogues were interesting to read through, the inventory and character customization options were complicated enough to make it interesting, but simple enough to not get overwhelmed by too many hotkeys. Just a tip though, in Divine Divinity you'll want to save often. To run the game, you'll need the following.
A long time ago, on the continent of Arana.
I've only ever played the first Dungeon Siege, and I'll always remember it fondly because it was the first game that I pulled an all-nighter on. Specifically, I think I was playing Counter-Strike until midnight when all the people in the local server eventually logged out, so I started looking for a single-player game to play instead. I had a copy that, if I remember correctly, I got for free with my graphics card, the mighty GeForce 4 Ti 4200. What a card that was. I booted it up and was immediately hooked. The graphics were actually pretty good for the time and the gameplay was fast and entertaining. Loads of items to customize your character with, a party you can gear up and give commands to. You could basically completely customize your playthrough, and I loved that. Before I knew it, it was 9 in the morning and people were starting to wake up and I was getting ready to go to sleep. And it felt great. To play the game, you'll need
Hey, Chief, you okay? You playing corpse or you putting the blinds on the dusties?
Planescape Torment was created using a reworked version of the game engine used to create the first Baldur's Gate. You play as an immortal called the Nameless One. The reason for the name is that you wake up in a mortuary not remembering anything, which is actually the trade-off for your immortality. Once killed, you can come back to life, but with no memories whatsoever. In the game, you wander the city of Sigil amongst other places to find clues to help you remember who you are and what your memories are. Along the way, you group up with a number of characters who you either crossed paths with in the past or whose lives you affected in some way. If you're thinking of having a go at Planescape, I would recommend you take your time and read through all the dialogues instead of just skipping through them, because the game's main feature is the story more than anything else. It's a very long game that will take you more than 30 hours to finish, so keep that in mind. If you do manage to play through the entire game, you'll have a great gaming experience from the past embedded in your brain. To play Planescape, you'll need Caesar 3 and Pharaoh are city building games that were both released 1 year apart in 1998 and 1999 respectively by Sierra Studios, using the exact same engine but are set in different time periods and different areas of the world. Personally, I only played Caesar at the time and all I can say is that I loved every moment of it. Besides the simple and straightforward gameplay, the soundtrack and the sound each building made when built really brought your city to life. Despite its simplicity, the game had many aspects to consider if you wanted your city to thrive and for you to reach your target. Each map had some goals you needed to achieve before being allowed to proceed to the next level, whether that was just to reach a certain population or a certain army size. It was pretty challenging. As the city's leader, you also had a salary which you could define at will, but you had to be careful not to overdo it because that salary would come from the city's treasuries, and that could negatively influence all sorts of things. From the people's morale to a lack of funds for necessities such as buildings, roads, trading, etc. You have to find the right balance because having a salary means you can save up and then give up any amount back to the city if necessary, or give gifts to Caesar, which grants you favor, which opens up other options such as trade routes that you couldn't access before. All in all, it is a great game for its time, and if you don't mind aged graphics, it's a great game even today. Simple, but at the same time complex, but without becoming overwhelming. To play the game, you'll need
Mr. Copel, Mr. Calavera has something out here that he says he needs your signature on.
Grim Fandango is the first adventure game that LucasArts made in 3D. It is essentially a point-and-click game, but unlike anything LucasArts created before it, such as the Monkey Island series, this was done in 3D and you could move your character around using the keyboard. The game is set in the Land of the Dead, which is the transitional plane between life and death, and you play as a skeletal character called Manny Calavera, whose job is to help passing souls move on to the afterlife. Even in death though, money is power. Manny discovers that his boss is actually dirty and is stealing the opportunity from good souls that deserve to move on and sells it to the highest bidder. Our goal is to put an end to this. The game is filled with hilarious interactions and dialogues, and although set in the Land of the Dead, is actually a pretty cheerful and fun place to be. Just ignore the fact that you're dead. To play the game, you'll need the following.
Since I really didn't get to celebrate the festival this year, I think I'm entitled to a little pan de muertos. The bread of the dead.
I am the son of Sharam, a mighty king of Persia. On our way to Azad with a small company of men.
Most people think that the Prince of Persia series started with the amazing Sands of Time game released in 2003. In fact, the first game in the series was released for MS-DOS back in 1989 and looked like this. "14 years later, when Ubisoft acquired the series, Sands of Time was born, and what a game it was. You play as a prince whose father was tricked by his vizier to attack a Maharaja's city. During this attack, the protagonist obtained an artifact called the Dagger of Time, while his father's army found an hourglass that contained the Sands of Time. The vizier was supposedly going to offer the hourglass to the ruler of the city, the protagonist's father, but managed to trick the prince into actually releasing the Sands of Time, cursing the city's population and turning them into monsters. The game revolves around the prince's attempts to reverse his mistake and returning the sands back into the hourglass, thus reversing the curse. What made the game stand out was the excellent gameplay, where you could use the prince's, let's call them parkour abilities, to scale areas you shouldn't normally be able to. If you have a controller, I would highly recommend using one for this game. To play Sands of Time, you'll need the following. A special addition to the list, one of my favorite gaming experiences from when I was a kid was playing through this game, Entomorph Plague of the Darkfall. I can't even tell you if it got good or bad reviews when it was released because I couldn't find any. I happened upon this game by chance. I had gathered a number of currency points at my computer lessons class, and at the end of the year we could use those points to choose a reward, video games included. So, I checked how many I had and what's the most expensive game I could get with my points, and Entomorph cost exactly what I had, give or take a couple points. The game hooked me from the start. The intro cinematic gives you a hint of the story, and then you jump in. You wake up on a small island smelling like death and not knowing how you got there. So naturally, you start exploring the island only to find a small village. Any person you try to approach gets spooked and acts like they've seen a ghost, because apparently you were supposed to be dead. Not only is the story interesting and keeps you going, the soundtrack helps you to really get into it. The CD had the soundtrack recorded on it as a normal music disc, so you could play it on a CD player. It was awesome. Look, if you're curious and want to check the game out, don't watch videos of others playing it. Download it and try it for yourself, but make sure to look past the graphics and enjoy it as if you're back in 1995.
Since I'm headed for
To run the game, you'll need basically any functioning PC. Seriously, this game is almost a quarter of a century old. Alrighty then. So, what do you guys think of this list? Any other gaming gems of old that I could have included? Please, let me know in the comments section below. Also, I will be releasing many more similar videos to this in the near future, and towards the end of the year, I'll be running my second giveaway season where each week, I'll be giving 1 or 2 games to a random commenter. So be sure to subscribe and enable notifications in order to be informed when this takes place. It would be extremely helpful if you guys could check out my Patreon page and consider a pledge there, or donate anything you can on my Buy Me a Coffee page. Anything would help me with more and better giveaways, and hopefully sometime in the future I will be able to do this full time. The dream. So anyway, that's gonna be it for now, guys. Thank you all for watching. This is the Bearded Gamer. Over and out.